We've noticed. Super. Well, welcome everyone. We're glad you could join us. I'm Cindy Olson, founder of the Executive Strategic Alliance, and both John and Anna join me in welcoming you today. This is a unique and timely thought leadership discussion in that Christian Gomez is joining us again today, along with Sarah Ann Birdsell of Workplace by Meta, to share how to use a couple of next generation technologies to operationalize a connected culture. As you heard, we are recording this session, and you will be getting a follow-up email, and the link to the recording will be in the email. And any slides that are used, we'll send those along as well. And then please feel free to ask questions. We want this conversational. At any time, put them in chat. We'll look at chat, and both Sarah and Christian will try and answer the questions timely. And if we miss a question, then I will make sure that we get it answered. There'll be time at the end to ask questions as well, but I can't guarantee you how much. So go ahead and put your questions in chat as you come up with those. So I want to talk just a teeny bit about ESA. For the past 6 years, we've partnered with ADP to build the ESA community of over 1,200 participants in 20 cities, delivering world-class thought leaders and technologies that operationalize shaping the future of work. In addition to ADP, we have also partnered this year with Alchemy Technology Group to bring cutting-edge technologies to our network, and Workplace is one of those amazing technologies. ESA is unique in that we bring CHROs, CIOs, and other work tech executives together because we believe that they all have to be in lockstep with each other to deliver the kind of worker experience necessary to attract and retain talent, especially now. Today, I'm honored to welcome back Christian Gomez, who works side by side with Marcus Buckingham, helping organizations create cultures where the employee is valued. Christian is the Vice President of Strategy at the Marcus Buckingham Company and a part of ADP. Joining Christian is Sarah Ann Birdsell of Workplace by Meta, which she's been with us in February, and she's joined us again. I'm so excited about that. In her role at Meta, Sarah works with technology executives to inspire them on the future of work journey. And prior to joining Meta, Sarah led global user experience and IT strategy teams for Sun Life, modernizing the tech stack through a period of digital transformation and focused change, all while engaging the employee voice. And we're also thrilled to have two rock star executives joining today who will share the challenges they have and are experiencing currently in creating and maintaining a culture in this hybrid environment. Christy Warren is IT Chief of Staff and VP of IT Shared Services at Builders First Source. And over the past 12 years, Christy has taken on expanded roles within IT, leading the support, service management, IT training team, and IT program management. In 2021, after a significant merger, and believe me, Christy's been through a lot of mergers, Christy accepted the position of Chief of Staff, VP IT Shared Services. She is invigorated and challenged working with a newly formed IT leadership team that is focused on transformation. On top of her COS duties, Christy also oversees procurement, contract, vendor, and financial management. And Nancy Fox is in the process of accepting a new CPO role to be named shortly. And she has held many senior HR leadership positions, including Sprint, Embark, Waste Management, Triumph Foods, and most recently, KBP Foods. And Nancy is probably the one CHRO, and I shouldn't say one, but she is one of the CHROs or CPOs that are extremely adamant about the HR leadership team being a driver of technology. You'll get that throughout this conversation that Nancy really believes that the HR leadership needs to understand technology. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how we use technology to create a connected culture. So this is going to be a truly special thought leadership discussion with some of the best leaders in the country. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for this opportunity, and I'm just going to bring up a couple of slides to guide the conversation on my side before I also open it up with Nancy and Kristy as well. And if I click on the right button, hopefully you can see my screen full screen. I'll assume you can.
Yes, we can.
So first of all, thank you, Cindy. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about my background and how I really got into employee experience. There's not a lot of IT leaders who, 10 years ago were talking about employee experience and why it's super important to really put people at the focus of everything they do. I actually started from a user experience background, and I previously, in a couple of previous lives before Sun Life, I led user experience through consultative marketing and really worked with organizations to understand the power of putting people at the center of everything they do from a customer perspective. That then, of course, translates into incredible business results and people. And so this has transitioned into my journey the last 2 years being at Meta with really thinking about happy people, happy customers, and happy business coming together. When I think about from an IT perspective, employee experience has to be about the person. We love to think about, belonging. We think about diversity. We think about technology, but it has to start with why we do it and putting people first. Getting solutions that allow us to listen to our employees, to really lean into their pulse, and to crowdsource them for ideas. When I brought in Workplace in 2017 at Sun Life and launched the product there, one of the things that we did was we talked about building connections and bringing people together. And we thought of it as a way to enable our organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tool, but also really why it is so important to listen to our employees. In the IT space, we often think about roadmaps and that linear direction to go somewhere. And one of the things we sometimes forget is that the people who are our best experts in the organization, and I hate to tell this to engineers, but it's true, it's not the IT team, it's actually the employees. They are the ones that are the pulse of an organization that drive and are the experts about what their needs are. And so we really need to lean into them and to listen to them. Workplace, we really want to think about the frontline employees. And so 2021, the Edelman Trust Barometer was published just at the end of 2021. So this is well into the pandemic. It was published in December, so just at the close of last year. And it focused on a couple of things that are really key when we think about our frontline employees. First of all, they really need to have a voice. We need to connect with them, and we need to find ways to reach out to them and meet them where they're at. And we need to listen to them, of course. So I'll give you a perfect example. This is my first day back from 2 weeks of vacation, and I ended up with a rental car last week with a flat tire. I was in a tiny little town, and when I say tiny, it may have had a population of about 700, but it had a little automotive center that was part of a big national chain. And I walked in and I said, out of town, out of province, and I've got a rental with a flat tire. And of course, I waived any of those, extra rental fees. So can you help me? And of course, small town, incredible service. Within 30 minutes, I was out the door with a new tire. But what I witnessed was this little automotive counter, big national chain, and 2 employees, 1 phone, trying to answer other customer calls on the phone. And one of them said, if only we had a cordless phone. And the other one said, if only, head office would listen to us, why can we not at least have Bluetooth in this day and age? And I watched them have this moment of thinking about customer, thinking about how they could make their lives better, make their jobs easier. 2 of them crouched in a corner at the automotive desk sharing a phone, but didn't have that vehicle or that power to elevate their conversation back to head office and didn't feel empowered to make that change. And so we think about those experiences that we've all seen when we're out and about encountering, those frontline staff in the fields. They have such incredible ideas, and how do we capture that and nurture that is something that we do at Workplace. Workplace really focuses on the fundamentals of purpose, community, and trust. It's building those relationships with employees. And I recognize we're a couple slides in, a few minutes into this, and I haven't actually talked about what the tool is. And that's because it's not about the technology and the tool. It really is about building that community and that relationship, bringing employees together, breaking down silos, and having people come together in a culture that is really empowered. We launched Workplace in 2016, so we're now a couple of years into the product. Workplace is live now in 137 countries. We've got incredible organizations and brands that use this. And I'm going to share a little bit about how they're using the platform and the product. For those of you not familiar, Workplace looks a little bit like Facebook, but it is a secure organization platform built within your organization. So I brought a couple of examples from two very different customers of ours. So in the smaller side, Delivery Hero, based in the UK, very similar to an Uber Eats type organization. And they use Workplace as a way to connect their drivers, connect their delivery folks, and really celebrate their employees. You'll see a post here, and these are ones that they've shared with us as a way for us to use in our conversations. But you'll see the post in the middle, which is a live video, and it's from one of their leaders, simply picking up their mobile device and doing a shout out, thanking people for service. On the right-hand side, Nestle. They've been a Workplace customer for quite a number of years now, and it's used as a way for them to connect their organizations around the globe. They do video, they host sessions and events as a way to really bring their employees together and communicate, and also break down languages. And so Nestle and all of its brands, Nespresso, Purina, they're on this journey thinking about future of work and how Meta can really play an incredible role in that partnership in a way that's maybe a little bit non-traditional for organizations to think about how they want to lean in and grow together. And so with that, I just want to say, when we think about why frontline is so important to us, part of the Barometer study also said that frontline managers waste 387 hours a year just on communication gaps, struggling either to change shifts, to find employees, to talk about new product rollouts, to educate. And that's an incredible amount of time that we can think about ways that we can improve and connect workforces together with technology enabling that. The other part is organizations who have adopted Workplace and similar tools that really empower organizations to come together have said that when a head office is connected to their frontline workers, those head office employees increase their empathy for that frontline manager by 25%. And so you think about how that can impact decision-making is really important. So I wanted to bring just a few slides. This is not meant to be, death by PowerPoint, but really meant to be a conversation for us to come together and think about that. So with that, I want to open it up to Kristy and start with you, Kristy, with maybe a question, and then we'll pass it over to Nancy about what are some of the challenges. I know in the opening, Cindy mentioned you've been through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and I'd love if you could share a little bit about where you're at on this journey.
Yeah, for sure. We have definitely, I've been through quite a few mergers. We recently went through a very large merger at the beginning of 2021 between BMC and BFS. And, we were still in a pandemic. So the rules of engagement were totally different than mergers and acquisitions we had done in the past. And it was a huge challenge. So trying to bring together 26,000 employees over 500 different locations, and nobody was traveling. Nobody was going to see each other. And so it was a huge blocker for us, because how do we get around that, keep people safe, but get people engaged and working with each other? We started small. We started with maybe 100 people in a hotel conference center that we all met at, top leaders, if you would, and then slowly build it out from there. the hard part is when your cultures are so different and you can't be in person and make those personal connections. It's very hard. We quickly learned that we had to dive in and make some changes, or we were not going to be able to really form together and transform as one team. We really pushed the use of video conferencing. We had, as an industry, I think typically mostly done conference calling. So you were on the phone, but you weren't on video. So we quickly instituted that. We immediately set up weekly coffee talks. It wasn't a weekly update meeting. It was just a weekly meeting for people to get to know each other and, you know, be able to see what their background was, what their interests were, what were they doing for the weekend, give shout outs to each other and kind of learn each other. And what we saw were people were craving that, not only from still being in the pandemic, but also all these new people that they had never met. So that was hugely beneficial for us, just having that standing meeting in time that people felt like they could break away from their desk and come and just have normal conversations like you would normally have at the water cooler or while you were getting coffee. So that was huge. But it was definitely challenging because, again, your people on a service desk can't just jump on a meeting like that. They have to man the phones. There's always some aspect of the group that misses out. So we really tried to go at it in different ways using technology. You know, we pushed the videos. We started implementing virtual happy hours, virtual game times at lunch, like people could eat lunch and play games to get to know each other. We created a committee called Builders Bridge, a group of volunteers that started really trying to push engagement, because what we felt like is as we got further into the merger, all these things we were trying, people weren't making that personal connection, and it was becoming evident that we weren't forming as a team. So we continued to push newsletters, activities people were doing, you know, sharing information as much as we can. It's a constant struggle, though, still to this day. As you know, we talked about before everybody jumped on, I'm in the office today and I've seen less than 10 people. People are still not in the office, so we still struggle with that. So I love what we're talking about here with HR partnering with IT. We've been lucky enough, we have a fantastic new CIO who's transforming IT, but we also have a new chief people officer who strongly believes in the partnership with HR and IT. And we've never had that. So we're very excited because it's the most important part of the company, the culture is, and that's what we want to drive.
Absolutely. I love that partnership, and I love the bridge connotation that you've got in that committee name. I think that really says everything about breaking down boundaries and pulling people together.
Yep.
And certainly, Kristy, you know, in your story there, and I know we're going to hear more from you. You also, I love that you also articulated the pivots that you made, right? You listened to people, you heard their needs, and you kept changing. And I think that's really powerful, and it demonstrates to your employees that you're listening.
Yes, and I think that's probably the most important thing. We tried to figure out any way we could to get their feedback. Some people are comfortable going straight to you. We had anonymous surveys. We had like all these things. We have a leadership coaching company that helps the leadership team. We set up meetings with them so they could give feedback to give us. So we really tried to set up different avenues for them to give us that feedback and pivot on. But I agree, if you don't pivot, then you're not listening and they're just going to give up. So I think we have definitely come a very long way. And I think it's because of us being able to pivot and really see what they need and how they need it.
Brilliant. Nancy, I've got a question for you. You know, in the bio piece that Cindy read out to us, she talked a lot about your recognition of that. I always think of it as like two peas in a pod, bringing the HR and the IT team together, and having an HR person really understand technology, but also, you know, I believe technology really is about understanding the people side of it as well, and bringing them together. I'd love to know a little bit about more, you know, was there something that kind of drove you to that? And if you could share a little bit about why it is so important to you to have that viewpoints of coming together to connect. And Nancy, I think you're on mute.
That's my trick. I do that every time. Sorry. So thank you for the question. I think that the catalyst for why I feel the way I feel about technology and technology and HR people kind of being one, it really goes even beyond technology. Okay. I think that as HR people, we are operating in a space that looks very different in this decade than it has in the previous two. And what I mean by that is that our subject matter expertise really sits in the background. It's the table stakes. Okay. And if we just live in that space, we abdicate our technology decisions to other people, and they may or may not get them right. And they may or may not form the right types of solutions that we know inherently because we engage so much with the work teams across the company. We may not have the right solution. But I think that there's this four-legged stool is the way that I try to explain it to the teams that I've led. And subject matter expertise given, it's a strong stool. To me, it sits, leg of the stool, it kind of sits in the background, if you will. And then we have to be technologists. We have to be driving right along with IT. And in the two companies that I have worked with for the last decade, there wasn't a strong IT department. It might've been a party of one, and it might've been desktop. And so it was not, and these were big companies. We're talking about, 20,000 employees in one organization. And then, and because it was a franchisee, they got a lot of the technology that they thought they needed and that they only needed from the brands that they were representing. But so we, in that case, we're needing to take a leadership role there. Previous to that, it was a food manufacturing company, and technology needed, in their opinion, was just around how the lines are moving in the food companies, how, payroll and finance is functioning, but not any of the softer side of HR, and of people. So the engagement platforms. So stool number one, subject matter expertise. We need to be technologists because we need to be writing the scope documents of what we think we need. Communicators and marketing people, because you have to be able to pitch what you're putting in place, and not a lot of HR people are very good at marketing and communication. And then finally, and I see Kristy shaking her head, and so if you're not supported by an internal communications group, you need to get that expertise somehow. And then the last leg of the stool, in my opinion, is data analytics. And that is the skill set of the future HR leaders, in my opinion. I think that's when things really, really come together. So, we in the HR world, the world that I've been in for the last decade, we held those roles. And we sought out all of the different technology. You mentioned earlier that 80% of most employees don't work at a desk, and 100%. And so the way we work every day is not the way most people work. So these app-based, on your telephone, these app-based engagement tools are critically important. Sometimes they're embedded within the HRIS suite that you have, like in Workday or SAP. But sometimes if you're working with a Kronos, for example, or one of the smaller players, but they're really, really good at payroll, and you need to be really good at payroll, and that's why you've chosen them, you need to have an engagement technology that sits on top of all of that HRIS work, so that you can participate in the way that that Kristy was so eloquent in describing. So we're sending out pulse surveys. Our ERGs are meeting privately. I worked in an organization that had 1,000 restaurants. Every restaurant had its own private conversation thread. So they could talk about schedules, and they could talk about, food safety or what have you, whatever that is. And then the company, was supporting recognition pages, Facebook pages, Instagram pages. Our leaders during the pandemic weren't able to go out. Kristy mentioned this too. All of a sudden, the world stopped on a dime. And whereas our leaders were in and out of our restaurants on a regular basis, what do you do now? Well, thank goodness we had that engagement technology, so that they could communicate via video. They could communicate via conversation thread. They could push surveys. We could push messaging from the top that in the past we had said, here's the script, go and, share, the topic ABC. And what we found is that when we really leverage to the hilt these technology platforms with nice videos and pre-recorded videos, but then we'd send meetings in a box so that they, participants, just like this one, people are going to write in a chat and they're going to, and we were all moderators, the creators and content owners of that particular meeting sat and answered questions to the pre-recorded questions that, or to the questions that were coming in on the pre-recorded session. So it's about using those platforms to recognize people, to build culture, virtual happy hours, meetings in a box supported by what you're seeing online. It can't just be a Zoom meeting. And what I thought was pretty disappointing after the pandemic, when the hybrid piece stuck, and I don't think we're totally out of the pandemic, but we kind of looks like that is about here. Hybrid's here to stay, but I think organizations are making mistakes when they allow or they don't promote that. Let's still keep your camera on. Let's still engage. Let's still hear from everybody, because I think one of the downsides, and maybe you'll get to this in a moment, of the hybrid work environment and having too much in technology is that you can multitask to the point of where you become disengaged in the meeting that's going on right in front of you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, it's definitely our job, and we need to put people in the center of every decision we're making today. We also need to have HR and IT working together to and communications, and a couple of others working together harmoniously to get the best result.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. And I'll always remember that stool analogy that you shared. And not only did you answer my question, you touched a little bit on Rick's question, which I really appreciate as well. So Rick, I'm just going to read out your question into the chat so that everyone's aware of it, and then I'll answer, and then open up to Christy and Nancy to get their thoughts as well. So Rick asked, does augmented reality technology advance the type of culture transformation process? And Nancy, I know you touched a little bit upon this technology exhaustion. I would absolutely agree with that. I think it is about the right size for the organization and really thinking through organization's needs. It's not about a right size for everybody. That certainly does not exist. I'll share a couple of examples and then open up if you guys have some as well. So Rick, you asked about augmented reality. I'm going to share a little bit about augmented and then a little bit about virtual reality, none of which is Zoom. This is, of course, very much the 2D version. But when you think about augmented reality, there's lots of really neat things that exist today. And we're seeing organizations do things like, embed QR codes on their assembly line manufacturing that then translates into knowledge library or translates into, documentation which supports a workforce, so that those folks that are deskless, those folks that are, maybe not accessing, content and training materials can get the information that they need to do their jobs. And so we think about access to technology, we have to keep in mind there's different levels of access. And so, that mobile friendliness is often something that's top of mind for many organizations. So something really simple as QR codes can be really powerful and easy to implement. On the flip side, we're also seeing organizations invest heavily in VR. Hilton Hotels, a great example, and you can look on YouTube, they've made their story public, created empathy training for their organization so that their head office could understand what it was like to work in a hotel. So kind of that undercover boss kind of experience. And it's changed how they've made some decisions, such as, how they, cut costs on providing extra doilies on the room service trays and the impact of that with spillage and things like that, by just understanding what some of those employees go through. So those are things that come to top of mind. I know we're about to wrap up and hand over to Christian, but Nancy and Kristy, do you have any examples on where you may have seen, or maybe you're just curious about how technology from a reality perspective play into your worlds?
Well, I'll just jump in. I'll go back to the restaurant business again, where I was most recently for the last 5 years. And our Facebook pages and our pulse surveys are, and more really our Facebook pages are so, I mean, we have our leaders out in our restaurants every single day, and they're bringing back and they're posting to us, I think what you're talking about, which is, here's what's happening in the restaurant and this could be better. And I think that we can never stop asking those types of questions. Now, there's a lot of the more cleaned up, I want this one to go to the external and I want this one to stay internal, and we manage that because we probably don't want to be forecasting to our Facebook pages are open, as our Instagram and TikToks and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think that particularly our employees are encouraged to share kind of the reality of a situation. Here's what's happening in the freezer. The other thing is that TikTok in and of itself is a bit of virtual reality. And a lot of times this is not always, sometimes it's welcomed and sometimes it's not, but you'll get right on your Facebook page from an employee or from a customer, this is what happened to me in the store today. It can be good and it can be bad, but those types of things, we review all of them. And it's I personally had access, as did our CEO, to our Facebook page, and we would see that stuff live as it came in and we talk about it.
Yeah, great examples. Kristy?
Agreed. Same with us. I mean, we definitely, for us, social media in our industry, we're typically behind the technology curve, is what I would say. Just our industry in general. So it's taken us a while to really get into the social media, but with the workers, retiring and new younger generations coming into the workforce is what they expect. So really ramping up our marketing department and really embracing that social media aspect of Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn has really driven a lot of traffic our way. And you're right, most of the time, it's not great stuff. People like to post negative more than they like to post positive when it comes to a customer experience. But I think we've really come up with a great way to manage that intake and really get more information out there to offset that, which I think is fantastic. And we continue to grow that. And like Nancy was saying, with the pulse surveys, you're going to get a net promoter score. You're going to get the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. And you kind of have to let go of those ones that those detractors that you're never going to change their mind, and really focus on that middle piece, which is what we've really tried to do. And I think IT has really stepped up with HR in doing NPS and net promoting scores in a company that has never done them before. So it's net new. So it's driven a lot of great change and communication for us using those tools.
Thank you. Hopefully, Rick, we've inspired you and given you some food for thought as well. So thank you so much for your question. I want to make sure that we are giving Christian lots of time because I know he's got some really cool content to share. So Christian, I'm going to pass it over to you, and thank you to Nancy and Kristy.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really phenomenal in terms of timing and the quality of the panel that we have here. And Sarah, thank you so much for your insight as it relates to the topic. As I'm listening to this phenomenal discourse, I'm thinking about, how do I add value to this conversation? What do I bring that would be able to complement what you guys are looking for as you show up and try to understand, how do you build a cultural connection through technology? And I think about who we are, like, what do I represent? I represent an organization that as in and of itself is about 15 years old, but the obsession of the organization from the moment it's been founded and what we've done up until this point is obsess over excellence in the workplace, and obsess over excellence in a workplace in a way that's tangible. How can we go out and measure the things that seem impossible impossible for us to measure? So what I'd like to do is something that researchers refer to as creating signal out of noise. There's a lot of data points, there's a lot of things that we can focus on, but what are the areas where we believe that we can get the most value from if we create the right amount of focus in the right amount of areas? So one of the things that I'd like to do is help try to define culture. When we talk about building a culture of connection, what is culture? I heard Kristy say culture is the most important thing for us right now. Well, let's start by trying to define it. What does it sound like? How do I actually measure culture in a way that allows me to be able to go out and then proactively address it? So I thought I'd do that by telling a couple of stories. And then what I would show you is, number one, how have we gone about measuring things as tricky as culture, as engagement or employee experience? And then what would we try to do to be able to reverse engineer the types of behaviors and outcomes that we all want within the context of our organizations? And then what I'd like to be able to do is highlight what does this dynamic look like in the real world with real people and real leaders like Christy and Nancy, as far as what you guys have been experiencing in the organizations that you've been leading. So I'll start by sharing a quick story. And this is kind of a laboratory example. When we look at organizations across the board, what we find, actually, before I do that, can everybody see my screen? Maybe a thumbs up. Does it look good? Okay,
Yes.
Perfect. So when we look at organizations and we work with different organizations, everybody defines culture in a different way. The first insight that we found in the context of research, tangible things that we can measure, is that their variance between culture in two organizations is actually less than culture within one organization. So for example, I know Nancy, your background way back when had a lot to do with telecommunications. So I use telecommunications as an example. What we have found when we study across different industries is that the culture between, let's say, Sprint and Verizon is more closely aligned at the macro level than it is within the culture of Sprint. So what does that mean? When we look at an organization, in this case, I'm going to use a retail example because retail is just a beautiful laboratory for us to be able to study. Why? Because, for example, this retail organization has thousands of locations across North America. And in every single one of those locations, you hire people along the same lines. You train them in the same way. You lay out the stores in the exact same way. They actually tell you the same type of, they provide the same script for when you check out. Yet, when you go and you study these organizations, you found something fascinating. The first thing is that when we go and we talk to the organizations and say, how do you define performance? How do you define culture? This particular organization told us something very interesting. They were able to model excellence in terms of performance by determining the local economic potential of the store that you locate the store in. And then they would measure that based off of profitability. Seems like such a phenomenal equation to get a really tangible result out of something that's very difficult to measure. So what we would see is this. In theory, performance measured by profitability would increase based off of the local economic potential of the store. Yet what you find is this, and this is what I believe we find at all of our organizations, regardless of whether we're in retail or we're in another industry. And that is the fact that you will find a team such as this one that is significantly underperforming based off of the conditions that we believe that are available to them. But then you'll also find a team such as this one, that in this particular instance, the way that this organization measures performance, they should be somewhere along the same lines, but the results could not be any more different. When we go in and we study, we find two things that really are important for us as we start to tackle this topic. The first thing is, while we do have an organizational culture, the culture that has the most dramatic impact on the individual and what they do when they're there, whether they stay there or whether they decide to go somewhere else, is the team that they're on. In fact, some of the recent studies that we've done during the pandemic have noted that the most important variable on whether an employee stays or leaves an organization is whether or not they consider to be part of a team. So the methodology, the signal that we use from a research standpoint, and then when we deploy support to an organization that's trying to create a better culture, we focus on the team. How do you go and you hone in on the team and understand what's happening on that team and then aggregate it to the rest of the organization? This is going to have a material impact on the types of tools that you deploy and how you deploy them. The second thing that we notice, though, when we start hyper-focusing on those teams at the top, because that's what we want to create more of, is that so goes the team leader, so goes the organization. I've heard you guys talk about it in the context of some of the things that you've done and some of the things that you've experienced. And the team leader has such a disproportionate impact. We found that up to 70% of the variance in performance between two teams can be directly attributed to that team leader. What that means is that if I were to swap, imagine if I were to swap the two leaders in these two stores, that sell the same products in the same way and train the same people, over time, we would start to see those results start to become inverted. So as we focus on driving a culture of connectivity, the things that I want to make sure that I impart upon you is that the level of focus needs to happen on how do I create a culture of connectivity between a team leader and their team members in the context of a team. And as we study what is it that those team leaders are doing, we find some very tangible things that we find across the board. The first thing is the team leaders that lead these high-performing, highly engaged teams understand who their people are. They understand that we're all wired differently and we bring different attributes to the table. We happen to define those as strengths. Who are you and what are you capable of? The next thing that they do is that they have a really good understanding of what are you doing? What's happening right now in the moment and how can I help you? And then finally, they understand how am I feeling? Am I about to break? Am I riding high? So as we start to kind of hone in on the signal, what do we need to know? We know that number one, the most impactful culture on employee experience happens on a team. Number two, the person that has the most influence over that culture is the team leader. So then what is the next thing that we try to do? My organization, what did we try to obtain? How do we measure this? How do we measure the behaviors that are going to lead to the outcomes that we want to create? Because that gives us that starting point. So I'm going to share with you guys a series of questions. What we did over a course of over a decade is that we worked with hundreds of organizations all over the world that had tens of thousands of teams in those organizations. And we asked them to tell us who your high-performing teams are and what your low-performing teams are. And you define what high performance looks like. Good outcomes, whether it's retention, profitability, customer satisfaction, et cetera. And we're going to ask them a series of hundreds of questions. And then what we proceeded to do was throw out the questions that did not predict whether a team was going to be high performing or low performing. And in doing so, we landed on these 8 questions. We did that over and over and over again. And as you can see here, they illustrate a sort of shared attributes that we find on the most high performing and highly engaged teams. Number one, is there a shared sense of purpose? Number two, is there a shared sense of excellence? Do we feel like we're supported? And do we have a connected view of what the future looks like? The other thing that you might note about these questions is that number one, they seem to address the we on the left-hand side. Do I feel like I'm a part of something bigger than myself when I come to work? Yet on the right-hand side, they do address the me. What about me? Where do I live in the context of this team, in the context of this job, or in the context of this organization? So what does that look like when we put these things into action? When we actually look at 2 things, the behaviors that matter in the context of a team leader and a team member, and then when we put a really good measurement instrument that can help us define, there's actually something that foreshadows what that's going to look like. And what we do is when we start to look at the predictive validity of these questions, there's 2 questions that actually rise to the top. Even though all 8 of them really give me good insight into who's going to leave and who's going to do something good when they stay, there's 2 questions that continuously have high levels of predictive validity. The first one, as you might have guessed by the prior slide, is does the individual feel like they have a chance to use their strengths every day at work? Not all day, every day. It might be 2 minutes during an 8-hour workday, but do I have the ability to apply myself and the value that I bring to my job? And then the next thing is at work, do I clearly understand what is expected of me? Why is this so important? Because when we talk about a culture of connection, if we understand these 2 variables, these 2 aspects of the human condition at work, it helps us focus on what a connected environment looks like. What is it that we want to build? And why does that matter so much? Using the same measurement instrument, what we were able to go out there and find is that we proliferated a practice called called check-ins, which is a frequent connection between a team leader and a team member in the context of work that focuses on 3 very simple things. How are you feeling? What are you working on? What's most important right now? And how can I help you? And what we would find across thousands and thousands of data points on teams is that whenever you had a situation where there was no attention being provided, in general, you had about a 20% full engaged team. Full engagement, in the way that we define it, is a person that is not going to leave the organization. It is a person that is going to produce phenomenally. So even in the context of a team right now, where we might be doing nothing to drive that culture of retention, we're still going to have 1 in 5 people that are really solid. They're going to perform phenomenally, and they're probably at no major risk of leaving the organization. If we provide them with some attention, once a month is actually what this is measuring, then you will see a bump, but it's not as significant as we might think. Even if that team leader is doing an amazing job of once a month reaching out to that employee and connecting with them and saying, I see you, I hear you, and I want to help you, it's not really moving the needle as much as we would think. But then what we start saying is that as you start to increase the frequency every 2 weeks, every week, you start to see an exponential increase in that level of engagement, to the point where you can have almost half of your team that is positioned in a way where they're going to produce significant value. How do we do it? So when I mentioned earlier, we have focused our efforts in building technology that reverse engineers the practices that we observe in the most high performing teams. Here's what we've gone out and created. And here's what we try to enable, and what I would love you guys to try to do in the context of your strategy as you're putting technologies in place. You don't have to do it in this structure, but it might help you provide a little bit of guidance in terms of elevating or prioritizing some of the things that you're already doing. So the first thing that we would do is that we deploy a standout assessment, which is an assessment that allows individuals to be able to understand, what do I look like when I'm at my best at work? And then we hand that to the individual, to the team leader, and everybody in the team. And then we facilitate the ability for everybody to see each other for the value that they bring. The next thing that we did is that we took those 8 questions that I just showed you, and we created a measurement instrument that could be deployed simply and frequently. Imagine it's only 8 questions, take seconds to fill out. But what we wanted to be able to do is put the control and the insight in the hand of the team leader, as well as HR and as well as the organization at large. So now as a team leader, I know, what is my team feeling right now? And then through that assessment, we can give you coaching intelligence by leveraging machine learning and AI to help you understand, what can I do as a leader to address the conditions on my team right now? And then finally, what we would do is put those check-ins into practice. How do I create a ritual that allows a team leader and a team member to have a frequent cadence where they're having these conversations? And then at the organizational level, I want to be able to replicate this dynamic. I want to know what's happening on the teams that are highly engaged, the teams that are not. What are those type of behaviors? And then how do I use that to inform my strategy? Now, let's say that is the thought leadership that I wanted to provide you guys with today. What are the things that we measure that we believe are tangible as it relates to culture? And how is it that we enable through technology the right behaviors and the right insights that are going to empower team leaders and organizations to be able to build that culture of connection? What I'd love to know as we sit here with Kristy and Nancy is, you mentioned, Kristy, for example, that culture is incredibly important to you. Can you give me some examples? And we had the privilege of speaking earlier, and I'm fascinated by the industry that you support because of the facets. Working on one team in your organization is a completely different experience than being in another sector. From your experience, when you say culture is so important, what impact does culture have on the outcomes that your employees create?
So, culture to me, like I said, is the most important thing in any business, because it's our employees, their experience is directly tied and makes up what our culture is. I think that when we went through the merger 18 months ago, we joined 2 companies together that had very different cultures. And that was probably, you can talk about having different ERP systems and different sets of GL accounts. You can go through all the business differences we had. And the culture one, to me, was the biggest shock to everyone, because the outside looking in, we do the same thing. We sell the same things. We're structured the same way. You guys will have the same culture. We'll just mesh them together and everything will be great. And that's definitely not what happened. And it kind of set us back a little bit, because I think assumptions were made there. So, we've already talked about a little bit of what we've done between HR and IT and trying to drive, a better culture. I think one of the what you just talked about, we implemented one-on-ones with our teams. We realized that some of our employees never had time with their leaders ever. And so we started out with bi-weekly one-on-one time. That's about them, not about us as leaders, but it's about them. What can we do to help them? What can we change? What do you need to be more successful and to be more in line and feel like you have the tools that you need to get your job done? That was a game changer for us. For a lot of people in the organization that had never done that, and the people were just giddy with the attention we gave them. They had never gotten it before. So that was a huge accomplishment for us. We talked about the net promoter scores. We also instituted this program called Level Up, where we kind of outlined this, IT backed program. Hey, we're going through this huge thing, this transformation. We're going to level up, just like you would in a game that you're playing. You want to get to the next level. And we kind of laid out what we wanted to be when we growed up and kind of were successful from the merger. And a lot of that had to do with culture. And I really, we really drove a lot of the things we've talked about. We've driven, we have our monthly leadership team go to each, we have offices in Dallas, Denver, and Raleigh. We go to each of those offices once a month. We have what we call level up luncheons. We bring people in, we let them ask questions, we let us talk about our kids and what's going on, that connection, but we really push them to level up in all areas and that they control their destiny and they have the power to speak up. If they're not getting what they need, then they can come to the next layer and the next layer. And our leadership team has really made ourselves available to help all of them kind of get out of that culture of, push down instead of push back up. Tell us what you need. And we're still going through it. We're still going through the transformation. But when I look at where we were at a year ago versus where we are now, it's night and day. It's completely different. The engagement is so much better. And again, we're continuing, like we talked about earlier, to pivot. Some things work better than others. So we're constantly getting that feedback to pitch. But the one thing that just stuck with me out of everything you talked about, Christian, was that one-on-one time, that direct connection. Employees have to have that. They have to be part of a team. They have to know you care. They have to be, this is what I consider, I'm passionate about people just in general, whether it's at work and at home, and they have to know that you care about them. They're not just a number. They're not just somebody spilling out work. And so it takes a lot of different types of leaders to make a company successful. So I also think the last piece is making sure as a leadership team, you have leaders to balance each other out. Different kinds of leadership styles and enneagrams, if you would, to offset maybe the commander with the giving, because you have to work together as a team to find that right balance. And right now, we really feel like we're in a good place and we're really pushing through that. So.
Thank you so much, Kristy. No, it's a phenomenal example. Again, the work that you're doing is inspirational, and I know how challenging it is, but I'm very excited to see how a lot of the things that you're doing are going to play forward. Nancy, my question to you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you're about to take on a massive responsibility. You're about to make a really big decision. I talked about signal versus noise. What is the signal that you're going to be looking for as you step into this new organization that you're going to lead? What are the things that you're going to want to know early on that are going to inform your strategy in terms of how you start to kind of address the culture inside of that organization?
Wow, that's I'm looking at the clock here and I'm going to try and do it in a minute, but I think any new chief people officer goes into an organization and conducts, tries to go on a listening tour first, right? And do their own audit and, looking at what kind of technology do I have to work with? What kind of leadership development practices exist? What is what are people saying about the organization? How tough in this industry, if not all, is the recruitment aspect right now? Everything is about, almost any organization you look into, they're struggling with recruitment. But I think, to stay on topic with what we just discussed here, I hadn't seen your slides. And you probably saw me sitting here shaking my head. I will leave this one example that this comes out of the restaurant industry, and I'm actually working with someone now to take what was in a deck of cards and automate it, okay? Because the data analytics, which remember was the fourth stool of my four-legged stool, we have to be doing something with these check-ins. They have to be automated, okay? Or otherwise you can't aggregate that data and say, because you can't do everything as an organization. And when we talk about culture, I always ask the question, people say this culture, and I always say, which aspect? Because we only have so much time, we only have so much resource. And so what we were using in the company I was just in was a deck of cards where it talked about everything from relationship with boss, my compensation, our team, trust and transparency, you name the type of work issue, work-life balance, loneliness, the hybrid work. And we ask employees, we said, managers, you need to make this a part of do it once a quarter with every employee, and new employees do it right away, like within the first month. Have them divide that deck of cards. And we might have been a card or two short of 52, but it was divide those into two piles, not an issue for me, everything's great, into the things that I have on my mind. Not that are problems, but things that are on my mind. And then we would lay those cards out between the manager and the employee, and we would look at what, the top three. And then that would feed into the development plan. Imagine if you had a practice like that was automated and fun and gamified, and the data that you could pull from it, and then ask what's missing. If we really want to focus on culture, we really have to put that employee at the table with us real time. And, then maybe our 52 card deck goes to 60. I don't know. But, if we really are if we really care about improving culture, because that is a competitive advantage for us, then we have to be serious about being able to truly deal with the data and then do something about it. So with that, I'll turn it back over. That was 2 minutes.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. And then I'll do the same. I'll be respectful of everybody's time, and I'll turn it back over to Cindy. Thank you both. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing the stage with me. And as always, it's a pleasure. And I'm very excited to hear about all the amazing things that you're doing and what you're about to embark upon, Nancy. Thank you.
Well, you guys, this did not disappoint at all. Kristy, Nancy, Christian, and Sarah, you guys were awesome. Great information. This has been recorded, so when we send out the follow-up email, you'll get a link to the recording. You'll also be given the opportunity for any one-on-ones that you'd like to have with Christian or with Sarah, and so we'll be reaching out probably in the next couple days with that email. If you have any questions that were not answered, I know, Rick, you had a comment. It wasn't really a question, but if there were any questions that you were not able to ask that weren't answered, reach out to me and ask the question. I'll get it answered for you. And with that, I would say have a great afternoon, and thank you to all of you guys. It was great. And thanks for being here, everyone. See ya.